My name's Aaron Ciotti. Everybody calls me Ciotti. I've been flying FPV for almost 5 years now, and I've been a professional drone pilot for the past 6 or so months. The biggest job that I've worked on so far was with the producer here in Atlanta that's actually booked me for the majority of my work so far, Spuds. And this was a job with DJ Drama, Rick Ross, and I believe it was Yeezy. It might have been Jeezy. Lot of stress, a lot of expensive cars, a lot of expensive sort of homes. But yeah, it was a blast. And I tend to perform pretty well under stress like that. So this is kind of right up my alley.
Gotcha. What kind of shots, what kind of work do you do? Like music videos, house fly-throughs, movies, commercials? Yeah.
Sure. So the majority of the work that I've done thus far has been music video with some home tours here and there, just a couple. But typically music videos, promos, commercials, that kind of stuff. I really enjoy music videos the most. There's a lot going on, and the directors are usually super creative. So that's currently sort of one of my favorites. I think it is my favorite.
What gear? Tell me about, give me a rundown of the gear that you would have with you. Like, when I arrive at a shoot, here's the stuff I brought with me.
In terms of gear that I'm bringing with me, two of everything is one of the more important things. There's a saying in the film world, two is one and one is none. Just having one of any piece of gear, that's going to be the piece of gear that fails. And, that can't happen when you're on set. So that's one of the biggest things right there, just having duplicates of everything. I'm actually one of the few guys doing cinematic work that's still on analog, I feel like. I think everybody's gone to DJI. I've had a lot of directors of photography and directors and producers that want to watch a monitor separate from me. The spot where it's best for me to stand to fly from is not necessarily where they want to be. So that's actually been one of the things that sort of kept me from going to DJI so far, is that, I can have, I have two different monitors, so I can give it to a director of photography and maybe a producer that's on site, so that wherever they want to be, maybe they're giving the talent feedback or whatnot, they can have the monitor with them and not have to come to where I'm flying from, which has been, really, really nice. I fly pretty basic gear, old QX7 transmitter with crossfire, Cinesplores from FPV Cycle, two of them on 2004 motors. And I keep them as light as possible. I really like that frame a lot and that build because you can make it so that it runs 5 minutes, but is still 460 to 480 grams. So a 3-inch Cinewhoop at that weight really, really flies well and is super accurate. And I can run it on 4S850 mAh batteries and still get that 5-minute runtime.
So you shoot for about a 5-minute runtime. You find that's good enough for the kind of shots you're asked to do?
Yeah, typically I can get 2 runs in on a 5-minute runtime, which is really good. It gives everybody a second to breathe. It gives me a second to think, talk to the DP or the AD, whoever I'm working together with. If I need more runtime, I do bring a couple of 4S1300s. They'll get me 7-8 minutes, but the flight performance of the rig suffers a little bit. So I really dig the 4S850s on that Cinesplore rig. It's a really good combo. I did have a gig up in Asheville with that I did with James Christensen of SOG, and that was actually a big 3.5-minute run, and it was nose down the entire time. And that was actually chewing up almost the entire battery in that 3.5-minute run. But that was a pretty specific, one-take shot. Usually the one-takes are not that long. Usually the one-takes are, a minute and a half to 2 minutes. So that was kind of a different scenario. But even in that scenario, the 4S850 still worked really well. So I was able to have that lighter weight rig.
You talked about flying the Cinesplores. Do you fly any bigger stuff? Any smaller stuff?
No bigger stuff as of yet, although I'm starting to get requests for it. In terms of smaller stuff, I have done some fun work for a couple local yoga studios here, where I've flown a little 65 millimeter motor to motor, which is a 1.2-inch prop tiny whoop with an Insta360 Go up on top. That's basically a little tiny setup that's incredibly safe, incredibly quiet, and it makes footage that's pretty much good enough for Instagram, I'm really excited now with the Insta360 Go 2. The image quality is a lot better on that camera. I just need a mount for the 75 millimeter motor to motor whoop, and I'm even trying to build a 2-inch cinematic-ish rig to carry that thing around. So some cool stuff coming with that over the summer or over the winter here.
Can you tell me about the camera gear that you use? You mentioned the Insta360 Go 2. Like, what kind of cameras do you use?
The majority of what I do is on a Hero 8, which is actually what I'm recording on right now. But yeah, the Insta360 Go 2 is really, really interesting. I can't wait to play around a little bit more with that. When this Hero 8 dies, I will be moving up to the Hero 10. I've got the TPU all ready for it. So just kind of waiting for that.
So so we talked about your gear a little bit, and the types of jobs you do. I think one of the biggest things that people want to know about is how to sort of get started in the industry. Let me ask you a different question first, though, and that is, at what point how did you know that you wanted to and were ready to like go pro? So you just like, I knew I was ready to go pro, or here's how I knew I was ready to go pro, something like that.
So I knew that I was ready to go pro when I got the first job, to be totally honest. My path in FPV has been pretty heavy on focusing on becoming as good of a pilot as I possibly can. The live streams were a way for me to make FPV into something that could support me in life. But the goal was always to fly. Flying has always been the most interesting, the most exciting part of FPV to me. So yeah, really the majority, like in my list of priorities in FPV, right, of which we have many, flying was always on the top. So I would always, really just get as many batteries in as I possibly could during a given week. And sort of having that approach, I didn't have to really like reach out to try to get work. The work sort of came to me, right? I mean, one of the things that you can do as an artist or whatever you want to call us is just to do really good quality work, and people will notice and sort of come to you. I spent a bunch of time trying to reach out and book gigs, and I found it just to be really hard, almost impossible to sort of make people understand what we can do. Like FPV is still so new that it's really tough to convince somebody your value. Even when you put, a portfolio or a reel in front of them, they seem to need to see like something that's one-to-one with them. So like if I was reaching out to a yoga studio, I would really need to show them another piece that I did for another yoga studio. Like they wouldn't be able to really understand what I could do from like a house tour that I would show them, or a drifting video or something like that. So that's sort of, I have a feeling that is sort of why I've had to just kind of wait for the work to come to me. And then what's been really nice is that after I booked that first gig and that edit went up, that producer had a huge following. And then what I did is just go through all of the comments. This got hundreds of comments, and I just went through them and just messaged everyone and said, hey, thanks for the love on the Spuds promo. I was the drone operator, would love to work with you. Your work looks great. Or, take a quick look at their profile and see what they're up to. See if they're an artist, or if they're a producer, or camera, or, sound, or whatever.
That's a really great tip. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from that. But so now let's take a step back because that first connection, I think everybody would agree that first connection is the hardest. And then when you get that first connection, a lot of times it kind of opens the floodgates. So can you tell the story of how you got that first connection to, I think you're saying his name is Spuds?
So the story behind the first connection is basically a success story of social media, really. I've been tagging all of my social, Instagram specific. For me, at least, Instagram's been the best platform for marketing for sure. And for a while now, I've been tagging everything with a bunch of like Atlanta, like ATL FPV, Atlanta FPV, Atlanta drones, ATL drones. And Spuds found that. Like that is literally how he found me. And then he checked out my page, saw work that he was happy with, that he was interested with. interested in rather, and got in touch with me. And yeah, we've actually become pretty good friends ever since then. But it was literally just, again, just putting myself out there, putting tags in my posts that made sense for somebody that was, basically like putting yourself in the mindset of someone in the film world that's going to be looking for FPV in your area. Yeah, when I was developing those Instagram tags that I would be putting into all my posts, that was sort of where my mind was at. Like, what would somebody that's in the film world search for in Atlanta to try to find somebody like me that's doing FPV, drone, Cinewoop, all this good stuff?
What advice would you have for somebody who says, I'm making content, I'm making videos, I'm flying, I'm putting it out there, and I just don't seem to be getting recognized. Do you have any advice for that person?
Big thing is just to keep going. Really, there's a pretty low chance that you're just going to get noticed within the first 6 months, year, let's say. Yeah, I mean, if it were easy, everybody would do it, is a saying that always comes back to me, and is one of the things that really just makes me keep my head down and just kind of keep going. Because yeah, I mean, and quite frankly, even when you do get that one chance and you do get, featured on somebody else's channel, for example, it's got a lot of views, it doesn't end there. Like, that's going to carry you for a couple of weeks usually, but then you're kind of back to square one, and you have to just kind of keep your head down and keep going and just keep pushing and keep building as much of an audience as you possibly can. So that's sort of been my biggest thing, is just to be as patient as possible, which is really difficult for me. I'm not a very patient person. But if I want to do this, which I certainly do, I'm going to have to be. And it's, it's sort of forced patience, I guess.
Do you have to be a great pilot to be a professional pilot and to do the kind of work you're doing?
Do you have to be a great pilot to fly cinematic FPV? Technically, no. But until you're a great pilot, it's going to be an awful lot harder. The better you are as a pilot, the easier it's going to be to get out of hairy situations, and the more experienced you're going to be when things out of the ordinary happen. If everything goes perfectly, an average pilot is going to be totally fine. But the second that they clip something, when they're flying in a really tight space with a whole bunch of talent on site, that's when we sort of separate the men from the boys, I guess you could say. The folks that have been doing it for a long time versus the folks that are trying to, learn how to fly in 6 months and start to make money from it. So yeah, that's something that personally I find to be pretty, when people ask me that question, it's like, wait as long as you can, like, just keep practicing, practice, get as good as you can, because, just running a Cinewoop around inside, might seem easy. You might practice it a bunch, but then when the stress is on, and that's another part of it too, right? Once there's talent on site and the stress is on, it's a whole different world. I mean, that's a big part of FPV, is learning to deal with stress. And yeah, if you've flown your apartment 50 times, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to handle the stress of an actual gig.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the ways in which flying on a set is different than flying, like, flying at a, you're for yourself or for fun.
The ways that flying on set differs from flying on your own, the biggest thing is going to be obviously that there are going to be objects for you to hit that you can't hit. When you just go out and fly for fun, you pick a spot where you can pretty much hit anything there, and hopefully there's, not much of a fallout. Whereas on set, there's vehicles, there's, homes, there's people, there's all kinds of things that you really just can't run into with whatever it is that you're flying. And again, with all of the stress, with all of the things that come along with it, it's really important to be ready for that, and to wait as long as you can, and just work as hard as you can to be the best possible pilot. So that, yeah, you don't have something happen, because we certainly don't need that as a community, right? We want to make sure that if we're working on these sets, we're representing all of FPV as good as we possibly can, and not putting a bad taste in the mouth of directors of photography and all these folks involved in the film world.
The question related to sort of that there was different things about flying for yourself versus flying for a professional, like that you need to be able to hit certain lines exactly and repeatably, that the, you know, other people's time, you're accountable for their time, you need to be ready to go as soon as, and just speaking about some of the sort of ways in which working on set maybe was different for you the very first time that other people might find interesting because they wouldn't see it coming, you know, perception versus reality, if you will.
So ways that being on set differ. You know, it's interesting for me. 20-ish years ago, I went to school for TV radio, communications degree in TV radio. So and then after that, over the years, I've done gaffer work and lighting work and a bunch of stuff on short films. So for me, there wasn't much, like I had an understanding of that world. There were no big surprises for me there. You know, I understand the hurry up and wait nature of it, right? You know, if I get my day rate, that's up to 10 hours. I'm certainly not going to be flying for 10 hours, right? I'm going to be on site, looking around, trying to find things to stay busy with, trying to find different lines, different little tiny things, being helpful in different ways. You know, having done a bunch of gaffer work, I can find ways where I can kind of help out here and there, just kind of to be a valuable person on set. I don't want to just be sitting there waiting, if at all possible. Like I want to actually, you know, get booked for another gig, right? So there really weren't any surprises for me, but it is, hurry up and wait is a really good one. You got to understand that you're not going to be flying the whole time. You just want to try to fill your time there with things that are as productive as possible. And then be ready when it's time. Like when it's time to go, you can't like, oh, give me 5 minutes to get set up. Like when you get there on site, get your gear ready, get your goggles around your neck, get your lanyard on, get your controller by your waist, and be ready to go at a moment's notice, because, you know, we're usually kind of B-roll. So we're usually in between scenes that are being shot on the ARRI or the Red or the Z-Cam or whatever they're using for the static shots. So it's really nice to just be ready to go, and because they're not used to that either. Like the directors are used to like, oh, aren't you ready? I'll give you 10 minutes. When you say to them like, hey, I'll be ready in 60 seconds, they love that. And then that gives them a little bit more time in between to be a little bit more creative with you. One of the other things that I've had really good luck with is really focusing on communications. Again, like as a communication major, this comes kind of easy to me, but it's really, really, really important to work as hard as you can to communicate with the other creatives there that are either telling you what to do or acting or, you know, whatever may be going on. Just being as communication heavy as you can with everybody else on site is really going to help out from a safety perspective and from a creativity perspective as well.
Without getting into too many specifics, has there ever been a time where you were asked to do a shot that maybe was unsafe or was technically infeasible? And how did you deal with that?
So the question is, if there's ever been a shot that I've been asked to do that's unsafe or unfeasible, absolutely. I always am very sensitive to, before the gig, making sure that and I've learned this the hard way, making sure that they tell me what the location is going to be. Absolute bare minimum, I need to know what the location is going to be. Before I started doing that, the worst case was I was supposed to go out and film a billboard, just simple stuff, just fly up to the billboard, kind of move around. When I got there, there were 4 cell phone towers right next to the billboard. And, you know, so if I'd asked for the location, even just going to Google Maps, I would have been able to see that. I would have also been able to see the 50 or so power lines that were around there. So yeah, that's really helpful, trying to get as much information before you get in the car, before you start getting all your gear ready, so that you can do a little bit of recon to make sure that the area is going to be safe. And also it's going to force them to give you an idea of what the shots are. A lot of times with music videos, it's just kind of like, hey, come out and fly around a little bit, and I have like 1 or 2 shots in mind for you, but then you can be creative for the rest. And that's great. But if one of those two shots that they're relying on is something completely outside of the realm of possibilities, you want to let them know that as early as possible. Here's a perfect example of that. Typically, these folks don't understand the difference between FPV and photography drones. So one of the gigs I was on, they wanted me to fly around the block and then in the window to the studio, right? Because on a photography drone, you can just map that out and it can pretty much do it by itself. So yeah, I had to explain to them, like, look, I have to have line of sight. I can put myself where I'm flying from in a location where I can maybe come around the corner, but there's no way that I can have line of sight around the entire building. It's kind of pointless to say line of sight to them. You just say that, you have to be able to see the drone. Also, if you're getting asked to do something that's unsafe, I've found it's pretty easy to just kind of say, well, the FAA doesn't like that. They control the airspace. You can kind of blame the FAA a little bit and just say, like, hey, I don't want them to come down on you because they'll come after everybody that was involved in the project. And that tends to work pretty well, so that it's not just like, hey, I don't feel like doing it. It's like, hey, I'm not going to do this, and this is why. It's something that you don't want to get tied up in either.
Let's talk about the FAA. I mean, it goes without saying that a pilot working professionally needs a 107 in the USA. I've always been curious how much of that is enforced by the guys who hire you. Are they like checking all your paperwork? Do you have to submit anything?
So the question is whether or not the folks that hire are actually looking for Part 107s. I have yet to have that experience. I've also not worked on anything all that big. From what I've heard from the folks that are working on the bigger gigs, is that absolutely they will be asked for their 107. But most of the stuff that I've worked on this summer has been smaller scale kind of stuff. And yeah, nobody has ever asked to see it. There will be a point, I'm sure, that I'll hopefully get booked on a gig that's big enough where they will want to see it. It's also sometimes location specific. A certain location will know about it and they will ask to see it. We run into that with drifting stuff every so often. If the event organizers understand drones, they'll ask to see a Part 107.
The audience for this video is people who are like hobbyist FPV pilots who are interested in going pro and sort of have questions about how to do it. So anything else you would add for those people? The floor is yours.
So I feel like the last thing I would add is that marketing is going to be a big part of this. I've been pretty lucky to have a bunch of jobs kind of come to me. But now moving into the winter, things have definitely slowed down. And I'm actually going to really need to dig into marketing to figure how I can kind of get myself out there a little bit more. Instagram has really been the best spot for me so far. It's just such a quick platform that like everybody is on, where you can share video that actually gets watched. But yeah, I actually need to do a little bit more thinking about that. And it's something that I hadn't really considered. I hadn't really thought about that side of it. How do we get ourselves in front of people in the actual film industry, right? Like it's a bit of a shift. We're all very used to trying to get ourselves in front of other FPV pilots. But this is totally different here. We're trying to break into the actual film industry. So things like looking for Facebook groups. There are typically Facebook groups in any given area for people in the film industry to hang out and chat. Getting your way into those groups, figuring out what hashtags and things like that you can use on Instagram. All these little tiny things are going to build up. But yeah, I think one of the biggest adjustments is just to get yourself out of like FPV marketing headspace and get yourself into film industry headspace. Because yeah, it's a totally different world. Having a huge FPV audience is not necessarily going to help you book cinematic gigs, because your FPV audience they're not the people that are going to hire you for those gigs.
They say if you love your hobby, never make it your day job, right? Do you still like flying? Or is it now are you all consumed? Because I've noticed this about when I went full-time on YouTube. Now I'm thinking about YouTube at least half the time. I'm thinking about YouTube. how to shoot videos. And so that's less energy that I have to think about. I'm just going to go rip today or practice a trick.
Sure.
And now you've got that where you're thinking about business and marketing. You know, would you do it all again? How's that going for you?
So the question being, if you love your hobby, don't turn it into a job. If you love your hobby, why turn it into a job? I don't love having to be an accountant, having to be a marketing person, having to be all these other things that are now coming into place with being a cinematic FPV pilot. But getting to fly as my job absolutely makes it worth it. I would certainly do it again. I don't know if I would really do anything all that different, to be honest. I was as patient as I could. I waited the right amount of time. People kind of just appeared out of nowhere. I know that's, you know, I'm kind of lucky in that respect. I'm in a good area. I'm here in Atlanta. But yeah, I wouldn't change a thing. Flying, cinematic flying is also a different challenge, right? Going out and ripping balls with a 5-inch freestyle rig is a huge adrenaline dump because we're kind of forcing ourselves by the way that we fly to have this adrenaline dump. Flying cinematic is a more stressful sort of adrenaline hit, but it's still incredibly fun as a pilot. You know, flying a Cinewhoop, you shrink all the ranges, you shrink all the distances down. And, you know, instead of going 80 miles an hour up over a tree, you're going to go 8 inches past a piece of talent. And that's just as fun for me, at least. Also kind of incorporating some of the things that I used to be really into when I was into the film world, has been really, really fun. Thinking about camera moves and, you know, how can I imitate a dolly shot and stuff like that. For me personally, has just been fantastic, and I would not give that up. For many, many years, I stayed away from turning hobbies into careers, and it kind of felt scary to do it in this case, but a lot of things kind of lined up, and I'm really glad that I was able to kind of take that leap because it's been incredible.
I got one more that I kind of forgot. I meant to ask earlier, but I kind of forgot, and that is, we asked about like your biggest job, your best. What's the biggest like, oh shit, fuck up moment that you had on set?
Biggest F up moment on set was hold on. Should probably not talk about that. So the biggest F up on set for me was flying an indoor shoot. It was a big one take rip inside of a warehouse, and pretty much in the worst possible location. I bumped something with the Cinewhoop. I was in a small room, and there were a bunch of people in that room. There was a bunch of talent in that room. And when I clipped it, it turned the Cinewhoop to its side, and it started basically heading right towards one of the people that was in the kitchen area. And it was a really good example of sort of why you want to wait as long as you possibly can to start doing these gigs so that you're as good of a pilot as possible. Because, you know, not to have a big head or anything, but a pilot with less experience might have gotten really hairy in there. I was able to get it under control, and not hit anybody and land it safely, and all was well. But it was a really good example of how quickly things can get out of control. And I mean, you know, it's a Cinewhoop, it's guarded, it probably wouldn't have hurt anybody, but what if it did, right? Like, nobody wants to be that guy. I certainly don't want to be that guy. So yeah, if again, just wait as long as you possibly can, work as hard as you possibly can to be a really good pilot, because once there's other people in the room with you and flying your rig, the stakes are completely different.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Ciotti. I really appreciate your time. And I'm looking forward to getting this video out.
Love
really
it.
Appreciate it, man.